Hey there, This Must Be Talking Heads. I'm Rodney, the world's best and only Talking Heads historiologist. And today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be talking to an author who has a new book coming out about Talking Heads, US-based author David Starkey, who has a new book called On Track Talking Heads. It's currently out in the UK. It's coming out on April 1st in the US and Australia. There might be other countries. I simply have no way of understanding whether there is or not. The book offers a background on the band, but mostly it's focused and structured around each of their albums and then each of the songs on each of the albums. So a little bit like the podcast was. And as such, I structured our discussion around that. So you can skip forward to your favorite album if you just want to hear what we have to say about that. But mostly I went through each album and found one song that I found interesting or thought David's take was interesting and thought might lead to an interesting discussion. So hopefully we cover your favorite album and do it justice here. But I hope you get something out of it, or I hope you just enjoy listening to us natter on about Talking Heads. If you have anything to do with anything I put out, you probably do. So without further ado, here's my chat with David Starkey, the right one, the good one. We were just talking about how there's a good one and there's not a not so good one, but you're the good one, I understand. So it's great to have you with us. How are you going today?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. Yeah, there is another David Starkey historian, a British historian. I definitely do not want to be confused with. In fact, my publisher, which is in Britain, was saying, "Do you want to put a middle initial in there to distinguish you?" And I just said, I have as much right to my name as this guy.
Absolutely.
So I'm hanging in there with David.
No. I think that's a good choice. And that other David Starkey is not welcome on this show. But you're very welcome on this show, because the reason we're talking today is because you have something new that has come into the world. And I think in various parts of the world, it might be about to come into the world. But we're talking about a new Talking Heads book, which always gets people interested and excited. Maybe we could start, first of all, with just your interest in Talking Heads, where that came from, if there is an origin story. I'm very interested to collect these from everyone I talk to. So hit us with how Talking Heads and you found each other.
Yeah. So I am 62 years old. I was born in 1962. And I grew up in Sacramento, California. It's kind of a working class town in the Central Valley. I just saw that album, Talking Heads 77, at Tower Records, Sacramento. It had a cool cover. I heard Psycho Killer. I'm not even sure if I had. I know I read a lot of the music press. And I was a great fan of Cream magazine and Rolling Stone and so forth, Circus. And I bought it, and I just was kind of bowled over by it. It's so different from anything else. I was a big fan of punk already. I had the first Ramones album, which had come out, I think, the year before. Had the Sex Pistols album, and these are really different ways of looking at punk rock. But I just bought this, and I thought, wow, this is great. I mean, and as I was writing this book and listening to it again for the 10,000th time, I just kept thinking how amazing these early songs are. So that's my entree into the Talking Heads.
That's excellent. And it's so great to hear someone say, I saw the Talking Heads 77 cover and I thought it was cool, because I think it's cool, but I've seen people online slamming it for being boring and too minimal. And I'm like, but it's great. It does everything it has to do.
Yeah. Gets you to buy the record.
Well, you dropped little hints there, obviously, and we've already sort of let the cat out of the bag that you've written a book. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And that's what we're here to get stuck into a little bit. On Track Talking Heads. Every album and every song. Yeah. Which is a great premise for a book.
So I want to thank the publisher in England, Stephen Lamb. It's with this company called Sonic Bond. And they started off, the publisher is a big fan of Yes, and I think has organized a lot of prog rock concerts in England. But he just realized that there was a market for people to do a deep dive into bands. And when I contacted him about a year and a half ago, I guess, no one had done Talking Heads. I thought that was kind of astonishing. And so he said, yeah, go ahead. And then basically you write an introduction and an epilogue and an introduction to each album. And then you literally go every album, every song, and just analyze it. You offer up your opinion. My book is kind of heavily sourced. I'm an academic, a retired English professor, so I have a lot of quotes from folks. And that's my opinion is obviously everywhere, but I try to get to hear what the Talking Heads had to say about that. And I would thank you for your podcast. I mentioned to you earlier, I didn't know about it till halfway through writing the book, but I tried not to write a chapter until or listen to your podcast until I finished a chapter. But you are quoted in there several times.
Yes, I
So,
appreciate it.
and that's because your podcast is so rich, with all these different things, and then I found some print sources also that I kind of filled it out with.
Yeah, excellent. And I mean, I think it's interesting for me to look through the book because I can see a lot of the, like a similar path that we've walked where it's like, I've read this book, I've watched this interview, picked up bits and pieces from here and there, and then add your own opinion on the top. And then you kind of filter it by like, what would people want to know? What would people find interesting or entertaining? Even if it's your opinion, but it might not be based in fact, you can always throw it out there as like, it might be interesting to just put this out there. And if you agree, that's fine. If you disagree, that's fine too. I mean, sort of there's no right or wrong answer as far as I'm concerned, but you can sort of see it's almost like we've both solved the jigsaw puzzle, and then it's like the Spider-Man meme. We pointed at each other, and went, "Hey, your jigsaw puzzle, and I've got one as well."
Well, and it's a great story too. I mean, the tension between David and Tina that starts right from the beginning. You see her in those early videos, just sort of staring at the back of his head, making following along, and then she gets so dang angry at him pretty early on, and stays that way. It seems like. And I feel like that's a great story. I mean, when I was taking creative writing classes, my teacher always said, "Where's the trouble?" That's how you knew you had a good story. And so there's some trouble there, despite the fact that the music itself, I don't think ever really it shows that at all. Do you?
No, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's on the surface of it, and to the degree that it's subdued or buried, it's buried in a way that a creative tension that drives positive outcomes and
Yeah,
delivers maybe better outcomes than you would have had if that tension hadn't been there. So I
yeah,
feel like for sure the story overall in terms of the tension is like lingering and then bubbling and then uncontrollable to the degree that everything falls apart. But I mean, we can always revisit the music, and for me, a lot of that sort of goes away. Even
mm,
the albums where people say, "Oh, but that's a David album," and the other band they don't
right.
feel proud of it because
Oh,
their contribution was
yeah,
maybe secondary or supportive. But for me, I'm just listening to it, going, "I'm glad that everybody got to contribute, and we've always got our favorites. So listen
right.
to your favorite one more."
Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder, in terms of writing the book, and I know from doing the podcast that I went through a similar journey on this, that there were things that I didn't know that I learned and blew my mind and made deepened my appreciation for everything that everyone in the band did. There were things that I learned that I didn't know before that demystified things. And I wonder whether you have a similar thing, like whether there's one thing that you learned where you went, wow, these guys are on another level and I didn't appreciate them fully. But maybe another thing where you were like, oh, that was my favorite song. And then just to learn that that was just a copy of some other beat
Yeah,
that lessens things for me or something.
I think for me, what I learned mostly from writing this book was the difference between writing about music. Elvis Costello said, dancing about art, it's writing about music's like dancing about architecture. And
Yep.
and and I've been listening, talking to heads again, preparing for our interview. I mean, this stuff is so full and magical. And then when you start to break it down, I think you lose a lot of that. So, I mean, did I find anything that sort of made me feel disappointed? I mean, I guess I was disappointed. I didn't realize they disliked each other so much. I mean, and
Sure.
when you read Chris France's "Remain in Love," and you feel him just sort of like nitpicking so much along the way, and then when you read David Byrne, he seems to he kind of pushing the band away. I think, at least in retrospect. So I don't know, that sort of personal dynamic was something that I wasn't as aware of. Um, it was fun to go into the details of how things were made, like the solos on "Remain in Light," and how kind of basic they were, even though they sound so wildly innovative now. and just the whole thing about fear of music being recorded in Chris and Tina's studio. Um, with this truck outside 3 floors below, and this tiny little control board. It sounds so fabulous. It sounds like it was recorded tomorrow,
Yep.
much less in 1979. So I don't know. Those are some of the things that I felt as I was writing the book.
One thing I was thinking we could do, since we both know the albums so well and the songs so well, and since the structure of your book is, album, song, 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 maybe we could speed run through the albums. And I've picked out an interesting little, or something that caught my eye about one song from each of the albums. And we could round out the conversation about the album if there's more to talk about. But maybe, I mean, I thought we could maybe start with 77 and just go all the way through. Flicking through the pages, I stopped on Don't Worry About the Government because this is a song that I not struggle with, but I have opinions on it. But there seems to be a variety of opinions out there, in particular about whether the song is earnest or ironic or sarcastic. And I know the band says, no, we're being earnest.
Right.
But I'm not sure it is earnest, whether they intend for it to be earnest or not, and whether their intention matches up with our experience of the song is whether that's important. What do you think? Where do you ultimately land on that one?
I would call bullshit on that a little bit, because you hear it over and over, and I think David Byrne still says it to this day. But I just don't see how, how you can be talking about your favorite laws,
the ones you consider your favorites.
Yeah,
like no one does that.
Favorites. I think of the people that are working for me. I mean, God bless them nowadays. We in America, we'd love to have people working for us.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah. But yeah, but I love that song. I love the details in there. I think it's the most detailed and imagistic of all the songs until we get to the Big Country. And I should say too that my main training and most of my life experience has been as a poet. So I'm zeroing in on those lyrics that seem to me most kind of conventionally poetic. That is that they're imagistic, they're rhythmic. I mean, they're always rhythmic, but just things that kind of call up a picture in my mind. And I can't help but think that is not sarcastic. And one thing that I would point to as a piece of evidence is the intro on the name of this band is Talking Heads when they play it live, and David Byrne laughs at the beginning of the song, right? And so that's a one little giveaway that maybe he wasn't quite so sincere as he claims in later years.
Yeah, he's saying this song's called "Don't Worry About the Government," and isn't that silly? Isn't that a silly position for someone to have? I think he just doth protest too much, talking about this great nation, and I don't think there's any way to read that final me. There's no way to read that other than a sort of like almost like Edward Monk, the scream, like
right.
It's all hitting me.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I point out in the book is when somebody keeps telling you, "Don't you worry about me," over and over and over.
You should worry.
Don't worry about that person.
It's a red flag.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree. Okay, then. Well, look, I'm glad that we are on the same page, so to speak, in that one. Do you want to move on to more songs?
Sure.
I've got Stay Hungry because, I mean, that's just a favorite of mine. And whenever I'm flicking through a book about albums and songs, a bit like if you're flicking through a book about movies, those like Leonard Maltin books, I don't even know if they make them anymore. You sort of flick to your favorite movie and you're like, what did they say about this one?
Right.
So I wrote down, one of my favorite ones. You point out that the lyrics are lifted from a bodybuilding magazine, which is still incredible.
It's really funny,
yeah. You talk about the change that happens after the chorus, where Jerry's keyboard line comes in and really livens things up, which is a very good observation. They played it a lot live, but it took them a while to pin down the lyrics. Like they had the song for a while before it went on the album. So it really seemed like one they kind of struggled with. And it feels a little bit like almost a song of two halves. But then I just started thinking all these references to muscles and moving, and it's almost like there's a joint in the middle of the song and the song pivots on it, a bit like a muscle moving. You know what I mean? Am I overreaching there? What do you think?
That's a really insightful observation, yeah.
I mean, I might be projecting way too much, but I just wondered, I don't know, what you thought of that.
I stay hungry. Stay hungry is that repetition. when you again, it's looking as I was writing the book, looking at any video I could see of the early band, especially before they recorded this album. Like you're saying, they playing all those songs on more songs, that hundreds of times, according to Chris
Yeah.
France. Um, and so it's a workout, it's a jam,
Yeah.
and maybe the lyrics don't matter as much.
No. True.
I can remember being in a punk band myself in the late 70s
Wait,
and
wait, wait,
early.
wait, wait. What was the punk band name?
It was called the Assholes.
Fantastic.
Somebody's going to steal that name, but the lyrics didn't always matter as much as the attitude, and I think
Yes.
something that David has said several times is that it's the way the words sound in conjunction with the music and the rhythm, and not so much the literal connotation of what they mean. And so there's maybe something about that, but then you're going back and finding this element in there that's still really strong and does kind of blend in with the rest of the song. So I think, well, just us, the fact that we're talking about this,
This
this
is nearly
lyric,
50 years old.
it on the page, you'd be like, okay, this is whatever. But that's one of the beauties of a Talking Heads song, is that it's so open to interpretation.
Yeah.
You can have conversations forever.
And for a long time, they were pairing it with artists only, which I think is also a bit of a clue of like, just, don't overthink this one. Just let it, just sort of experience it and just go with it, maybe. Let
Yeah,
it ride.
yeah, absolutely.
A good pairing there, I think. Um, we could move on to Fear of Music. And I mean, it feels criminal to like blow past all the other great songs on all these albums. But I mean, yeah, we'd have to do a whole series if we wanted to do an episode on every song. But look, I'll try. But if there is something you want to jump in with, please just interrupt me. Let me know.
No, I'm enjoying this. Yeah, but I'm not knowing
Hope
what's coming next.
Fear of Music. I've got Animals.
Uh-huh.
You point out that the lyrics are silly and absurd, and you are not wrong. We don't really empathize. I wrote here we don't empathize. Oh, we do empathize with the singer in "Don't Worry About the Government," but we sort of laugh at this guy who looks at animals and like. There's a sort of similar thing going on, but with "Don't Worry About the Government," we're like, "Oh, you silly guy." But then with
Yeah,
animals, we're like, "This guy's a little bit scary," and we sort
yeah.
of,
What's his problem with animals? Yeah.
yeah, what is his problem? Where has this come from?
Well, what's his
Um,
problem with air too? Well, yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, it's an interesting lyric. It's pretty long. It's in terms of the content. Um, I don't know. I like it, but this is kind of a central thing about Talking Heads. I feel like the moment it gets too serious, we got to do something silly and comic, and back away from that seriousness. And so later on, like we get to City of Dreams. That's a beautiful song. There's just a tiny bit of irony when he says Europe and Germany, and so as if Germany wasn't part of Europe. Uh,
yes.
but, but there is a difference. I don't know if that's maturity or whatever, but there's also a real punk, ethos in doing a song like Animals and just saying, animals don't give a shit about us.
This thing that people think are part of nature, and they assume that nature is more or less completely there to nurture and support us, where it's maybe it's not, and not vicious animals, not sharks and
Right,
snakes. Any animal who might be walking around in your house right now is
right.
thinking ill of you, thinking that you're a fool for looking after them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's I think I point out in the book that, or somewhere in there, that in Nature Boy, remember there's also they're eating nuts and berries too.
Yes, yes.
So by the very end, that's not such a bad thing. But in the third album, it's still something that not a,
Yeah, I find out. I mean, there's sort of, it's almost like on Fear of Music, this sort of motif of, I mean, obviously, famously, a lot of the songs have one word, but it's like this one's about cities, and it's like, well, what are all the cities, and how do I feel about cities? Animals, what are all the animals, and how do I feel about animals? And it's not always David. He is often stepping into a character's shoes. I don't think he doesn't like dogs or thinks that cats are laughing at him. Well, maybe not all the time. Maybe I mean, he said when he smokes weed, he gets very paranoid. I don't know. We might be unlocking something here, but yeah, it's a little bit like a lot of those sort of fit together. Don't worry about the government, stay hungry, and animals are like Imagine this perspective. It's not my perspective, or it might not be my perspective, but it's someone's perspective. And what song would come about if that person wrote a song?
Yeah, and that's a kind of a time honored poetic technique to write in the voice of someone else, a dramatic monologue. We see that in Browning and Tennyson, and we see it in Byrne too. And it works most effectively when you step up and say I rather than he or she. And so I I don't ever really think it's completely him. You hear you hear Chris and Tina saying, "Oh, those early songs are just him to a T." But he's obviously exaggerating for comic effect. He's trying to get people to listen, and you see it. And also, having played in bands, when there's people out there and you can see them getting bored, you do anything you can to keep their attention. And
Yes.
one of the things is to act really weird and strange and say weird stuff. And so that's a great performative technique.
But then there's Psycho Killer where people are like, oh, is David okay? I know he's playing a character, but how much of a character is it?
Right,
Luckily,
right.
it was a lot of the character. But I mean, that was like the early signs of, hey, that thing worked. What if I
Yeah,
step into the shoes of someone else who has a bit of a weird perspective?
yeah.
He got a lot of mileage out of it, so I can't fault him. Remain in Light, and I've picked out a song, but I feel like particularly Remain in Light is like the big album. You probably want to talk more about it. I think people probably want to hear us talk more about it, but I wanted to maybe start with Houses in Motion, and then we can open it up a little bit more. We can be a bit more relaxed on this one if we want. But a couple of the things that I wrote down. This is where some of the research that you've done and I've done sort of come to the surface, where you just say, look, Ian Gittins calls this sketchily drawn and ill-defined character pieces, and that's true. um, I guess though, what I wondered was, is it such a bad thing if characters are sketchily drawn or ill-defined? Because you like if too much detail was given, that he's doing too much telling and not enough showing, and also part of the genius is what details to show and which to keep.
Well, and it's a song for Pete's sake. It's not a novel
Yes,
or a short story or
that's
anything.
right.
You know, I have to say, when this album came out, 1980, I was a freshman in college by this time. Had bought all the other records, dutifully along the way. This one kind of put me off. It was a big album in my. I was living in an apartment with some other college students. It was on all the time. I had a harder time getting into this album, and I know it's. I think an analogy, and I might have used this in the book, is that it's like Kid A, versus OK Computer for Radiohead. Fear of Music, and it's just this big leap, but it's something really different. Um, and so, I have to say, while I love this album, I don't love it as much as maybe some of the other ones that we're going to talk about.
Cool.
I think it plays great live. The songs from this album and Stop Making Sense are some of the best. That Cross-eyed and Painless ending the concert, it's just fabulous. It's a really complex album, and Houses in Motion is is one of those songs. But is that one of your favorites?
It's one that I came to like because when I first encountered Remain in Light, I was like, oh, yep. So Once in a Lifetime, that's the one with that on it. And then the other big songs like The Big Curve, Cross-Eyed and Painless,
Right, right.
and so on. But Houses in Motion is one that after I'd listened to the album maybe 100 times, Houses in Motion comes on and you're like, I don't think I've ever given this one its due. And I just feel like I mean, it came out as a single. And I asked Chris France about it, and he didn't even remember it coming out as a single. And I was like, oh, maybe it came out in the UK or something. But like, it just seems forgotten, and it's not on any best ofs, and people just don't really talk about it. So I kind of feel like I'm pulling for it.
Yeah. Well, you're making me want to go back and listen to it again. I mean, is Walking a Line, he hates to be dreaming in motion, and so forth. I think one of the things about the lyrics on this album is that he's clearly expanded beyond the sort of persona of the paranoid self. He's looking out into the ocean, and I think that's really admirable. I think what I'm less entranced by than other people is the repetition of the music. About have the little parts coming together and going over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I find that like on the great curve at the end. Uh, uh, I'm like, no, the overload. I'm sorry, not the great curve.
Oh yeah,
Um,
the overload. Yeah.
the overload. It's a really long, lugubrious song. It's the one that Burns said he wrote before he heard Joy Division, imagining what they would sound like. Um, and it's I mean, it's either this kind of quiet benediction for this breathtaking album, or it's just a really long 6 minute song, and or it's both. The only song, if you're giving me an opportunity to pop into a song that I really don't like, is "Seen and Not Seen," and I kind of give that one a little. I cast
That's a
some
skipper.
shade on that in the book. This is the one where he's imagining that people can change their faces, right? It's the spoken word piece. What are your thoughts on that one?
I made it. Like I said, I tried to force my notes around one song, but the only other note that I wrote after flipping through your pages was "Seen and Not Seen" is the album's weakest track and not the overload. I don't know about that. So there you go. That's what I think.
Yeah,
I think "Seen and Not Seen" it probably has more to offer than the overload, and if nothing else, it's shorter.
yeah, it's definitely shorter. So yeah, anyway, I mean, but this is it's an album that repays a lot of attention, and I think that's what we'd say about any great album, about the Beatles' White Album, about London Calling by the Clash, or whatever pops into your head, is that you want to go back to it over and over again. And I have done that. I guess I haven't always found it as satisfying as, for instance, you or our mutual friend David Sherman, who was, I'm sure, watching the show. And and so it makes me want to keep going back to it. There's something about it that's putting up a little bit of a force field for me, that I need to keep on trying to break through.
I think that album starts so strong and delivers for so long. If there's weak songs, for me, they all come at the end, and for me, they get progressively weaker.
Yeah, yeah,
People can have their opinions about that, just my opinion. So I'm sort of always keen to put it on, but never so keen for it to finish.
yeah,
And I heard recently there's a new album that just came out, and the last song on the album finishes with this vocal refrain that says "Play it again, play it again," and it's almost like begging you to go back to the start and play it again. This
right,
album does that, but it's because of the songs at the end. I'm like, I really just want to re-listen to those songs at the start again.
yeah. Well, and so on the actual LP, it's just those first three songs are side one,
Yeah,
and yeah, and that as you're saying that, I'm thinking those are probably the songs I heard over and over in college.
yeah.
Was that one time?
And I mean, for me, once in a lifetime is such a huge draw, and it gives you that incentive to flip it over. But other than that, if you've got it on side A, you may as well just move that needle back to the start and keep going. And I'm sure a lot of people did that. I'm keen to hear "Remain in Light" in "Speaking in Tongues." Whether you have a favorite, you might have already said that you maybe don't prefer "Remain in Light" across the whole oeuvre. But out of these two, which one is your two?
I think I would have to go with "Speaking in Tongues." I mean, it's clearly more pop. It's
Hmm.
more accessible. They are doing a lot of the same things with taking small musical elements and using them over and over. I feel like in both albums, there's a real strong family resemblance between each song,
Yeah.
um, and which is great. It feels like an album, where everything works together.
There's a really interesting thing going on in the Talking Heads fandom where there's this love for the song Moon Rocks. And it's
Right?
a little bit inexplicable in so many ways because it's not one of the hits. It's one of the lesser songs. It might be the best of the lesser songs, maybe, but it feels like a little bit of a gem that people just go, I love putting on Moon Rocks. It's so silly. And I
Yeah.
love that most people probably wouldn't like it. Maybe there's a bit of a ownership thing going on there, but you
Yeah.
wrote that I love this line that you wrote. David Byrne eats a moon rock and it gives him special boogie powers, which is so true. I don't know. I guess I just wanted to talk about moon rocks, but beyond that, because I acknowledge that's a silly and lesser known song, we can talk about anything else you like.
No, no. I love that song, and I don't know what his relationship to drugs was during the composition of this
They were
album.
good friends.
I think that these are the weirdest lyrics of any album. Despite the fact that the music is maybe the most radio friendly.
Yeah.
So that's another one of those classic Talking Heads tensions. Um,
Yeah, it's true.
you're getting, I mean, the two hit songs aside, but yeah, this is strange, and you can't really believe. someone eating moon rocks and floating up. Um, it's such a wild conceit. But because every song has such a catchy beat,
Yeah.
I'm willing to go along with whatever he puts out on this record.
I feel like a lot of people pick up with Talking Heads when they say they're a Talking Heads fan, and when they make being a Talking Heads fan a big part of who they are, I feel like part of what they're tapping into is this sort of perfect blend of artistic intention and expression with acceptable mainstream pop uh, breakthrough, whatever you want to call it. So
Right,
this sort of blend of like you probably heard of Talking Heads and you might like them. You could talk about them with someone at a party, but you
right.
could talk on any level. You could talk about how cool they are to dance to. You could talk about how great the references are to whatever deep philosophical movement is influencing the lyrics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the thing about these lyrics is that there is a kind of philosophy embedded inside them, as silly as they may be,
Yeah.
and that's kind of part of what the the longer conversation you'd have at this party would be teasing that out.
Yes.
But you also feel like David Byrne is never going to be too open to making everything too explicit. Um, I interviewed a person, a painter today, and she was saying, I don't want to blow the mystery. And I think that's one of the things that he doesn't want to do. And good for him. That leaves a lot for us to discuss.
And then you look at a song like Burning Down the House, which just has this explosive power to it, this absolute magic in every beat and every note, and connects with people on a level that, I mean, as much as a song can connect with a person, that song seems to just connect with people and they just love
Yeah,
it. But
yeah,
I mean, I've sort of posited in a few places. I think that he's really thinking something quite deep in, even if they're like, well, a throwaway line at a Funkadelic concert inspired this. I'm like, the deeper, more interesting question is why did it inspire him to write the song? What was going on in his mind when he heard that input that created his version of the output?
yeah. And more potentially complexly, what happened when Chris France went to the concert and told David about it, and he said that he was the one who went to the concert,
Well, I
which
don't know
is
whether he was at the concert or not, but I mean, look, the version of the story too that I heard was that it came about when they were jamming and Chris was screaming, "Burn down the house,"
right,
and
right.
that passed through as they went through iterations of the jam as well. So look,
Yeah,
whether David was at the concert or not, I don't
that's
know. Whether he just heard Bernie Worrell talk about it or not, I don't know. But
yeah,
I mean, that was the origin of it. It's good to know that, and I think it's interesting and valuable to know that. But again, I feel like it sort of transforms along the way. And
yeah,
so, and again, that might be why it hits with people so instinctually. But also, if you stop and think about it for a while, the idea of a house being like the self and destructing it, and what does that mean? Where does that take you from there? The song is also full of non sequiturs, so it's a usual David Byrne trick to fill his lyrics with non sequiturs. But again, it's a bit like free association. Like meaning comes out and it means something, or it might mean something, depends on your perspective on the philosophy of how the brain works.
yeah.
But just spitting out all of these seemingly random things, there might be patterns and meaning underneath it all, regardless of whether it's intended or not.
Well, and it is one of their most explicitly political songs. Again, I remember 1983. Reagan was in his first term. He wasn't the popular president that he sort of later became, because there was a recession, and just that anger there, that resonated with a lot of people. I think that we're burning down the White House, or
Yes,
we're going to burn down the house of government, or
the establishment, what's
yeah, the
accepted.
establishment, and yet it's such a joyful song, and with a little bit of a tongue in cheek. So
Yes.
you it wasn't like a song by Gang of Four or something like that, where you really
Yeah,
did
that's
think
not
we were down the
not
house.
really David's style to do that. And it follows off a little bit from Once in a Lifetime, that sort of existential awakening to the fact that you were asleep and your life has just happened in autopilot while you were asleep. But this is almost like, well, what's next? Where does that go next? And this is taking action. This is turning that revelation into action.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And he definitely has mentioned that the metaphor of the house is the self, and I think that that works.
It tracks. Speaking of political, I mean, this Little Creatures. I struggle a little bit with the album Little Creatures. I did write down "Give Me Back My Name" because I think that's also a bit of a political song, and I'm the first to say like I might be right about my theories about that song. I might be wrong about it, but I just think it's undeniably political
Oh yeah.
in a way that's also a little bit like pick it up or leave it. It's up to you. But I think there's something going on. That said, I understand that "Give Me Back My Name" is a bit of a bummer song to talk about. So if you want to talk about that, great. I'm here to hear it. Otherwise, what else have you got?
I think that's the only time in my 150-page book, Rodney, where I disagree with you.
Oh, great. Well, it's fine.
So you mentioned that you're here a kind of a Malcolm X thing going on, right?
I was just Googling around and trying to research what does it mean for someone to use X for their name. And then Malcolm X came up specifically that he referred to himself as X and that would be almost an erasure of identity or something like that. And then that ties in with "Give Me Back My Name." And I was like, for me, the song started talking to me in a way that the song had never spoke to me before on that level. So I wanted to not let go of that. And, again, I've said it before, I've said it here. I'm happy to put myself out there and have someone say, no, I don't think so. And I'll be like, I don't know, maybe. I'm just thinking here. But that's where I landed. But I
Yeah,
mean, what do you
and
think?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think my perspective is coming from my lived life. So in 1985, 1980s, well, it was in 1985. I was in graduate school at UCLA. It was a really theory-heavy time um, for literary theory. Everything was deconstruction.
Yeah,
Jacques
right.
Derrida was like the king of everything. Paul de Man later, kind of discredited as a Nazi collaborator. But naming was a big thing. Um, to name something was to put something on top of it that didn't necessarily fit with it, right? That was potentially arbitrary, and I think that's kind of what I'm hearing. That I want to get back my name because someone's taken it from me, or maybe just because it doesn't fit. Now that would go back to Seen and Not Seen, where the narrator is imagining people's faces and how
Sure.
that might shift. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I don't think is that your favorite song on the record?
No.
It's the weirdest one.
No, 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 no. It's what actually I think not to call Chris out, but I think he did an interview once where someone asked him, "What's one song you regret doing?" And he said, "Look, I don't regret that song, but it's just a bummer to kick in with And She Was and then go into Give Me Back My Name. It's a bit of
Yeah,
a downer."
it's a weird album. Let's face it. It's I mean, I think their most popular album.
Yeah.
Strangely because of And She Was and
Well,
Stay Away.
that's it. I love all the hits. I love And She Was. I love Road to Nowhere. And then the weird one, the one that I'm a weirdo for liking is Lady Don't Mind
Yeah,
because I feel like it was sort of almost a big hit here, maybe bigger than other places or something. But I love that song, and I think it doesn't. That's another one that's like not on the best of. That no
right.
one ever plays it live, and it's like, but it's so good.
Yeah, and I think you're right. In the UK and Australia, it was a non-hit here, and I'm sure you've seen that Jim Jarmusch
Yeah,
video,
the clip.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's just really noirish, and then the things with the color in black and white.
yeah.
Um, I think that makes that song pop a little bit when you watch the video.
It
Um,
might be a better video than it is a song. I don't know. It's very simple as a song. I guess
yeah,
there's not much to it. It
yeah,
was also floating around during the Speaking in Tongues era, and they sort of, they didn't put it on the album, but then they
right,
sort of had another crack at it. So they were maybe thinking, we're still not even sure about this one ourselves. And I
yeah.
asked Jerry about it. He said, yeah, the record company said they wanted that to be the first single, and they were like, you what?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, well, and she was is that's one of the catchiest videos I think
Sure.
still ever. Um, and the song also, I mean, the weird song for me is the title track, "Creatures of Love." It which it evokes for me, as I mentioned, Eraserhead. It also Mulholland Drive, where the characters at the end are these little people running around.
Yeah.
It's so weird and creepy, and yet you got this kind of countrified backing track. That's I was listening to that today, and I was just like, this is so damn strange. It's so singable, creatures of but what's being said is just really weird. So, you know, I mean, and again, that's to me kind of the essence of Talking Heads, and one of the reasons why we love them is because you're drawn in on something, and then
Yep.
you kind of wait, well, what's going on?
Oh yeah, putting on a Talking Heads album because you've heard the hit that's on the radio. It's never a straightforward thing, and it's never. I feel like you probably, if you went to an album cold, you wouldn't know what to expect, even from album to album. But also, like, you can't say it's boring. Even if you put in the effort, you will get some reward. You may like it, you may not like it. You might find a lot of value or a little, but it's not pedestrian.
Yeah, it never. And you know, my wife is not a big fan of Talking Heads outside of the you know the singles and stuff like that.
Outside of you wrote a book and she has to.
No, she was really happy when I finished the book because we'd be driving around. I'm
You
like,
stop
oh,
talking about it.
I'm gonna put on Little Creatures, and oh my god, you know, so weird. What are you doing? You gotta listen to it, give it a chance. But you know, I mean, and that album has, you know, as we said, "Road to Nowhere," which to me is a classic American song, and if you go through, you're not necessarily looking for hits, but songs that other people can sing, and that
Yep.
we can imagine people listening to 50 or 100 years from now. I would say that's one of them. Again, despite the fact that it's got a pretty simple chord structure.
Yeah, no, absolutely, it's great, and it's really if there's one that's really stood the test of time that isn't burning down the house, maybe it would be this one. Both of them tapping into, I guess, a similar sort of. One's a bit more of a edgy look at that, but the other one's a little bit more of an encouraging one. Almost sweeps you up, and then you don't even realize, wait, where are we going again? Oh, but it's just so infectious that it'll stand the test of time. I am very sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm wondering also because I'm one of those people who Little Creatures and True Stories. I dock a few marks out of 10 for each of those compared to the other ones because they're my favorites. Like Little Creatures and True Stories, I have that weird tension between great pop radio hits and then the other songs maybe don't offer as much as they do on the first couple of albums, let's say. So I wonder where those two albums sit with you because it seems like you either sort of bump those two up or you bump them down a little bit and across the board if you were rating them.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that True Stories, despite the fact that it's probably maybe the least critically acclaimed of the albums, is one of my favorites. It just when I listen to it, I just feel this joy from the opening part when they're laughing at the beginning of Love for Sale to the end of City of Dreams, which again I would like with Road to Nowhere put up there as one of the great songs in the American Songbook. So I love that album. People like us. I mean, again, it's singing it now in America 2025. That would be a horrible thing to do because you don't want people who only want to be loved. We want people to fight back against oppression. But there's something still catchy about that, and you know, I mean, there's the overlay of the film, which was so
Yep.
weird. But you know, you can still see John Goodman singing that as the finale. So anyway, I'm a pretty big fan of this, and I know that makes me kind of like a on the outside
Yeah, you're an outcast.
person, but
No,
I would.
people like us is one that people bring up when people say, "Oh, yeah," and True Stories. I don't really like that one that as much. People always go, "No, go and listen to people like us," because it just puts you in a good mood. It
Right,
just captures exactly what it's supposed to do, and that's what it's trying to do. So, you know, they don't all have to have polyrhythms and contrapuntal whatevers, and you know,
right,
they can just be good songs, and that's what that is. I obviously gravitate towards Wild Wildlife, which I think is one that regardless of your opinion of the album as a whole, Wild Wildlife was just one of those songs in that echelon of And She Was and Road to Nowhere that was a big song that everybody knows, a big party song, or you could
yeah,
just sit around and pop it on while you're driving in your car.
yeah,
It's just one of those good songs that it really delivers.
absolutely. Well, and another favorite of mine is Dream Operator. Again, I think that is a gorgeous song. The long, it's like a minute long opening. The difference between David Byrne singing it and the actress who sings it in the movie, it couldn't be any more different. It's
Yes.
pathetic when she does it, but I think it's really ethereal when he's singing it out. I think that's. I mean, there's a few little lyrical blips where you can see him kind of raising his eyebrow, but mostly that feels like a pretty sincere song, which makes it unusual in the catalog. You know.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk about the sort of purposeful tension that gets built into a lot of the songs and a lot of the albums, but with this album, some of the tension at least comes from the fact that if you put on one version, it's David singing. If you put on another version, it's someone else singing, John Goodman or Pop Staples or whoever it is. And so for me, there's a bit of a tension there between obviously the movie soundtrack, the Talking Heads version, and then all the other things that revolve around that, including the fact that like the Wild Wildlife film clip is like it's like the version in the movie, but it's heightened, it's more MTVified. So you sort of have to it has to have a foot in both camps. It's there to serve the movie, but it's also there to serve MTV.
Right, right. What do you think about the movie itself? I'm curious.
Boy, I find it's a really hard one. I really struggle with it because
Yeah,
I mean, I know I'm supposed to like it because I'm the Talking Heads guy or whatever, but there's bits of it that go for so long where I don't feel like David knows what he wants to do.
yeah, yeah,
Which I could forgive a weird slow movie if I feel like David is controlling and being purposeful about every decision or something. I can get into auto filmmaking, but I feel like that movie drifts a little bit, and I find myself watching it and just sort of my energy for it falls away very quickly.
yeah. Well, one thing I would say about City of Dreams, which is the outro track over the credits,
Yep.
as I say in my book, I think that is one of the most gorgeous endings to a movie ever. It's this beautiful song, and this little girl is picking at weeds, and she's walking down this super straight road on flat Texas, and then the credits finally come up, but it's just really magical for me. And again, that's because it seems to have more sincerity than maybe a lot of the.
Yeah, and it serves the needs of the film well. Which I mean, it's I mean, there's lots of films that do this, but they sort of tell mini versions of their story, maybe at the start, maybe at the end. So you get the sort of mini version and then a longer expanded version with a few twists and turns, and then we maybe tell the story a third time at the end. So it does a good job of creating its own world, but complementing the world that's been built in the film, and then just telling a little story and giving you something to chew on and think of as you're walking out of the theater or doing whatever.
Yeah, right.
Is there anything else? I want to acknowledge that you just said that True Stories is your favorite album. So please, I'm going to open the door. If there's anything else you want to lay on the table, go ahead.
Listen, Evidence is great. I love Hey Now. Are you kidding? I mean, it's this short song with a few chords. I think it's great. I mean, I think Papa Legba, David said, well, I should have never sung that. I should
Yeah.
have had Pop Staples do that. But I think his version is really good. I think he
Yeah.
somehow managed to embed himself in there. And
Yeah.
I mean, I just think there's a lot of good songs on that record.
If I ever listen to that record and I'm not in the most positive mood, by the time we get to Papa Legba, I'm like, oh, that's right. That's why I listen to this album. For whatever reason, that one kicks it into gear for me.
Yeah, yeah. I think I got this album on a cassette when cassettes still existed, and I know I played it in my car a lot, and maybe that's part of it is that I associate that with like,
Yep.
oh, this is a relief from whatever else is going on right now, and
Yeah.
also that every song was good.
And there's a lot of people that was their first Talking Heads album, and so it remains their favorite because it was the first. It's special for them.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, people come at that album from different places for sure, and there's no right or wrong. You can love on whichever one you love. Naked. I mean, this is where people will call me weird because I love Naked. But Nothing But Flowers, I think, is the obvious, like, it's the song that everyone likes and likes to talk about. So we already mentioned before that there's a little nod to animals. I think there's also maybe a little bit of a touch of, again, I didn't intend for this, but don't worry about the government. There's a thread of that sort of comes into here, although it's flipped around this time, where before it was like, I love that the government is there for me and the structure that's there supporting me. And now it's like, I kind of wish that that nature wasn't overrunning everything, and I wish I had my structure back. So it's he just loves having structure so much. He just loves those comforts, and the fact that nature might overrun his world is a bad thing.
Well, so the song goes so much against conventional thinking. You don't realize it at first. The very first time you hear that, you're like, okay, and then you're like, wait, what? There's been cars.
Even the name, you think Nothing But Flowers. You think this sounds great.
Yeah, and then you realize that he really
he means there's nothing but flowers.
Yeah, and this is a great a little bit of writing. I think having the parentheses around nothing but, because it just stops you, and then you don't realize, but by the same token, I don't like to refer to the videos, but when you think about the video, it's got all these little factoids about how the
Yep.
world is running down,
Yes. True.
and it seems like the video maker is trying to obfuscate the message of the song, which is that the guy wants to live in this world that they're saying is so bad. But yeah, no, I mean, just a fascinating song, and such a great sing along. It's really joyful. I love that song. So I'm in that regard. I think we're together. This might be the album that we can talk about the most because
Hey, there you
I
go.
feel like you do about Remain in Light. I feel like the first side, the fast side, with Mr. Jones and Blind, it is all those songs. I really like them. I feel they're ambitious. They're put together. I like the big horn section. Um, when we get to the second side with the Democratic Circus, I guess I feel like things really go downhill, and so maybe you can talk me out of that that opinion.
I, oh, I hear it a lot, and I don't mind I don't mind Democratic Circus. Facts of Life is one that I could, I can see the positives in it, but people who are in two minds about Naked, that I say no, put it on and give it a try.
Right?
When they get to Facts of Life, they're like, I am out. This album is not for me. This is a hard
It's
no for me, and I'm like,
weird
oh
seeing
no,
that.
you're
Yeah,
missing out on some good stuff.
yeah,
But yeah, I don't know. Democratic Circus, I feel like it just sort of what I like about it, and I think I describe it as like a sort of a Doors kind of build where it sort of slowly, very slowly, probably too slowly, builds and builds. And in the middle, there's this stuff screaming and there's stuff exploding. And I just feel like I enjoy that ride.
yeah,
But it may not be for everybody. And it may be like, it may feel like it's ham fisted of a name, Democratic Circus. Oh, I see what you're doing. You're almost being too obvious. Can't believe you named a song that. And
right.
then people might go into it with that impression, and then it doesn't turn them around, which
Yeah,
is a bad thing.
yeah, and I think that was my critique in the book was that David's just got so many great ideas for metaphors, but politics is like a circus, ain't one of them.
Sure. Yeah, and it probably just like if you're not on board from the start, it sort
Right?
of doesn't really take too many detours. It's just kind of like there's that, and then it repeats.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
okay, I get it. And then Facts of Life, very industrial, very weird sounds, and probably some messaging in there that doesn't gel with everybody.
right,
In terms of view, again, I kind of think of it as like there's plenty of other songs where David takes a view that people might find objectionable, but people sometimes can't get past the
right,
position on that one. There's other songs even on the CD and stuff. There's Bill, which people really have a very tough time with, and it's not on the original vinyl, and that might be for the better. But people are really like if they weren't on board, Bill's not going to turn them around. So
yeah.
yeah, I get it. I do think Cool Water is a strong
I think
ending,
Cool
but
Water is taken. I think if you can get to that point,
if you can get to it,
but I had a long uh, section about Bill in my book, which my publisher talked me into cutting.
you might want to. No one wants to read that.
Well, I mean, the argument was kind of like, we can't judge things from the perspective of 2025 in 1988, but I still feel like, I don't know. I think this guy is really creepy. He's with a young girl. He's going to kill her, or
Yeah,
they're
it's
going
not
to
good.
mutual suicide. This just has a yuck factor to me that I don't find anywhere else. I don't think in any other song. So you can see why it was left off the vinyl album because it's I don't and just the fact that it's the penultimate song. It just really brings things down. Although I mean, if you took the words out or if you didn't understand English, I think this is a gorgeous little
Mm,
song.
you might. It's very of the time as well. The I don't even know what you would call them. These sort of long bass notes with lots of life to them.
Yeah,
Slow sort of drum beats with really bassy, warm, sort of swampy, swelling kind of sounds. I feel like that was around a lot in a certain kind of music in the 80s.
yeah.
There's no danger of this one being a radio hit or anything though. So I don't know. Maybe they were just it was too good to not do anything with, but maybe not good enough to give
Well,
its
I mean,
full due or something.
the Japanese say that if something's perfect, you have to scratch it or break it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it doesn't. it's not a real work of art.
It
So this
doesn't
maybe
feel like it's a thing that was created. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, if what you have to do is make a playlist with side A and then Cool Water, maybe that might listen to that 100 times and see if it
yeah,
turns you around. I don't really know. And then there's obviously this new life that the album has because if you stream it or whatever now, it finishes with that sax and
exactly.
violin song, which is a whole other thing. So
It is. Yeah,
the
yeah. It's like
experience of the album today is totally different.
yeah, absolutely. And you had those songs like Saxon Violins and what Popsicle, um, that came out at the very end when the band had essentially broken up. So I mean, there's some good stuff in there, but I don't that doesn't feel like it's part of the canon in a way.
No, that's true. All right. Well, what I feel like we should probably do is find something positive to go out on, and then we'll wrap up. So, how do we get to something good? What is coming up next? You've written this book, so what's next? Is there any more Talking Heads stuff, or is Talking Heads put to bed now?
I'm going to try and promote this book as much as I can. There's a lot of on track books, but I think there's a lot of Talking Heads fans. So I'm really grateful for you to invite me on, and I can kind of mention it. I met, in fact, I'll throw it up here
Here it
again.
is. Go get that one. I think it's a great time to be a Talking Heads fan because there's lots of like new recordings and reissues and people talking about things in shows and on podcasts and on YouTube
Yeah,
and books to go and look into.
yeah. Well, and I think a book like mine, I think you can probably read it in a day or two, if you put some work into it, and I think if nothing else, I've taken a lot of the bits and pieces as you did in your podcast and put them together so that you kind of know why they did this or who inspired that, what David had to say about this, what Tina had to say about that, and then I offer my own little opinion on each song. I hope it's a pretty good read. I mean, I think when again, I want to go back to my friend David Sherman, who was a real inspiration to me because he would bounce off ideas, and he said, "Don't write a Wikipedia book. You've got two things that you know about that you're a good writer. I'm a professional writer, and you listen to these songs a lot. So just do put those two things together." And I hope that I ended up doing that. I would say, Talking Heads there's no band like Talking Heads whatsoever. Nothing's close at all. And so when you enter that universe, we're kind of nitpicking about Bill or whatever. But it's just it's like if you were critiquing Shakespeare because Titus Andronicus is stupid or is boring, but it's still Shakespeare, and there's the work is just so magnificent and so varied and so much fun to listen to.
Yep.
That to me that's a positive note.
I think one of the things that I always strive to do, and it's a measure of success for me, and whenever I put anything out, is someone might listen to a podcast episode about an album, and then they'll tell me, listening to your podcast album made me want to go and listen to the record again, or it felt like I was engaging with it. Like I have a bit of a parasocial thing going on, obviously, but like people say, it's like talking to a friend about my favorite album. So I love that. So I feel like the podcast and obviously your book fits into that sort of fan service where we're putting something forward that if you want to engage with it back, think of it as a two-way thing. If you could read it, listen to the album, read it, listen to the album again, and it just deepens your appreciation for it. So that's what we're all about. And I think one of the things that I liked flipping through the pages of your book was how it supported and nurtured deeper exploration of the music, and it was in service of celebrating the music rather than focusing on like this drama ruined that thing or this, like some other books that focus a bit too much on that, and it's a hard balance to get right. So well done to you on doing it. It's a great achievement. I think writing any book is probably a great achievement, but I'm sure you feel proud, and I'm sure that people who check out the book will have a great time revisiting some of their thoughts about the music, but adding your own to their understanding of the albums.
Well, so my final note is that I enjoyed writing it so much that I asked these guys at Sonic Bond, is there anything else? So my next book, my next on track is going to be Bruce Springsteen, 1973 to 1987. They don't have a
Hey,
so the glory years.
that's great.
Very different. But somebody else who writes a lot in persona, like David does.
And I bet your wife will love hearing Bruce Springsteen for the next 3 or 4 months. So there you go.
I'm going to hear the Springsteen and the Talking Heads, so we'll see.
To take us out, David, could you please let us know if people who are interested and want to know more, where can they go? What should they look at, and how can they follow you for more info?
Well, probably the easiest thing is just go to my website, David or David, yeah, it's davidstarkey.net.
Cool.
And I'm on Instagram at david.starkey984. So the main thing I would say is just head out to wherever you buy your books and pick up a copy. It's been out in Britain for a couple months. I'm not sure in Australia, but it will be out in America on April the 1st, so in about a week from when we're talking.
There you go. Very soon. Very, very soon. All right. Excellent. Thank you so much for your time. And on behalf of myself and all the Talking Heads fans, thanks for the work you've done.
Thanks, Rodney.
So there you go. I thank David very much for his time. I had a great time talking to him. I've had a flick through the book, and I'm really looking forward to diving into some more of the details. And you can obviously order the book, or you might find it at your local bookstore. Go and support your independent bookstore. Tell them to get it in. Or if you just can't find one anywhere, it's always available online. That book was called On Track Talking Heads. It's part of the publisher's On Track series. And I should point out, there is a bit of a run of Talking Heads books coming out. So it is, as always, a brilliant time to be a Talking Heads fan because there's reissues coming out, there's books coming out. I think that there's never been a better time in the last 2 decades to be a Talking Heads fan because there's more to sink your teeth into than ever before, and I'll be covering it all right here. Can't wait to share some of the really big things that are coming down the pipe. So stay tuned, stay subscribed for all of it, and if there's something you want to see on the channel, you can always let me know. The website is thismustbetalkingheads.com. I've been Rod. Take care.